People's definition of ego is problematic. It is now the #1 protective system that we have. Why? Because you could be seen at every angle. So your relationship with me and I is threatened the most. And the same thing goes for you, Dylan. It's actually what you came here for, and you've done actually a lot in order to just break it down so that you can be free. It was holding you back from that feelings of just shooting the shit. And I love how you say that, because that's exactly what you want to be. You want to be free. And unfortunately, that's not going to be the case due to the way that a lot of you live your lives. You're not free. You're protecting something, and we all hate that, because when we're protecting something, we're attached. So I want you guys to remember, if there's anything that you have in your life, if you could consider what it is, the places where you're the most free. Sometimes it's work, sometimes it's the gym, sometimes it was a place in your life to where you didn't even quantify success. You didn't really care about success, but you were just doing things that were authentic and real. What we're trying to focus on today is one thing: what you are protecting yourself from, and how specific that is to you, and how you can't discover it because your ego's in the way of it. I want this to trigger you. That's the whole point. And I want you to find that as an enjoyable process. Like, for example, when I went to jiu-jitsu, when I first started, anybody does martial arts?
I'm trying to start now with boxing, but...
With boxing? That's great too. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit harder to be an egotistical prick in boxing than it is in jiu-jitsu, because you can literally get knocked out by anybody if you're not paying attention. So, yeah, I wanted to dedicate it to a few things, right? Ego, perception, and protection. Those things kill people. Well, why? Because there's no vulnerability. And that's a really difficult thing to acquire, especially in a world where you don't trust people. Leander, I was speaking to you the other day, and I was glad that it went from 5 minutes to 30 minutes, because it really gave me a good idea of what's happening and how damn difficult it's going to be for you, not because you don't have information and you don't have the willingness to do it. Brother, you've dedicated time. You know what it is to be disciplined. But perhaps it's nothing to do with that at all. It actually has to do with what would happen if you lived a vulnerable existence, which is really the life that you want to live. You would no longer be protecting yourself. And so I had this women's group the other day, and what came to mind was how everybody said when she was at work, she was a different person than when she was at home. And she was like, in what way? Better or worse? And she's like, well, better. And she was like, well, I don't understand that. Why would people say I'm better at work? I hate work. And I said, well, at work, you're not attached to anything. So I don't want you guys to be attached to anything. I want you to be free. We all know that when we go, fuck it, I'm not going to be with a girlfriend. I don't want a girlfriend anymore. I'm done waiting. You meet your girlfriend, right? When you're like, you know what? I'm not going to let the amount of money I make dictate how I live my life. I'm going to live my life. And then the money comes. So all of these things have to do with attachment. And I'll tell you the one thing that allows you to be as attached as you do, and it's slick, and you probably won't know, and it is your ego. Now, your ego feeds off two things: what other people think, because, oh my God, it fucking loves it. Other people's perception. And the amount of pain that you're protecting yourself from. So what I often noticed is that if more people tell you you're the shit, and the less you feel like it, so it feeds off perception and control. Those are the two things. Let's write that down, because the other one was kind of that, but not as specific. And you're like, well, why control? I'll explain. When you can become tactical enough to get the responses that you want out of people, then that makes you feel safe. If you can get the looks from the girl, if you can get the, yo man, you're super smart, when you have an insecurity around intelligence from the guy, then you can feel what? Control. But here's the problem with it. It makes you unaware. And for anybody who understands anything about growth, is that awareness, the broader you can make your awareness, the more you can fuel your energy through that awareness, and the more you can create in your life. Because, if you're unaware a lot about dating and perhaps even your own behaviors, well, then what ends up happening is you create like self-sabotaging, destructive cycles, and you can't really break free from them. So it really made me think about it. What if you're intelligent? What if you're determined? What if you're hungry? What if the information you've already had a shit ton of, right? Because most of us has already had way too much information for a lifetime. It actually turns out way too much information for a lifetime. But I'll tell you what scares most people in their life is fear of failure. It scared me for pretty much 21 years of my life. I just never understood what stopped me from interacting with it, right? Because it kind of seems easy, right? Somebody goes, hey, talk to that girl, she's pretty, get rejected. Or go start that job, it's fine, it's one of many businesses. And I could never do it. Even though I could understand it, I could never do it. It would be crippling anxiety around anything around finances or anything around significant beauty. there was one thing in common that didn't allow me to do it, which is one, I couldn't see the vision of the life that I wanted to create and the commitment that I had to make, not for myself in that particular day-to-day interaction, but for the rest of my life who I wanted to become. There was a character and an individual and an ideal that I was working towards that was exceptionally difficult for me to interact with because I had no ability to see it. I could not see myself. That's the thing about ego. It tells you this is who you are. Here's your identity. This is what happened. Look at what you've done. No, you haven't done shit. And I'll tell you why you haven't done shit. Because if you're here and you feel sick and you feel like you can have more, you haven't done it. There's an emotion. It's my favorite emotion. Humility. Anybody ever experienced that? It's very particular. Matthew, what was that?
Just going over the difference between humility and humiliation.
Yeah, right? It's actually a really fine line. There's a big difference between it. You know, I actually don't recommend that you be humble. I recommend that you have humility. There's a big difference. I'm a modest mouse. I'm not that good. It's okay. Sure, another way to say that is I'm really good, and that's why I'm humble. So pretty much it's another way to say that I'm really good. So is that so humble? Probably not. So there was something I really noticed, and it's that a lot of people have pain. And the areas in their life that they want to go, they are unaware of where they need to go, which is why we need each other, which is, I'm just going to start this off. You guys think you can get to where you want to get on your own? Absolutely not. You'll think you got close, but no, you haven't even seen what you're capable of bringing into reality. So Leander, if you have any questions, you can interrupt it to get a better understanding of this.
With the sign down there, or do I just talk? Or,
Yeah, you could throw up a gang sign or whatever it is.
Okay. So by humility, you meant that you realize you're not where you want to be, and that your goals are way higher than where you are right now.
Yeah.
I mean this.
So from our call the other day, there was a few things that came to mind, and I think you'd really like it, right? Vulnerability and humility means that you're able to exist with a level of awareness that will even imply that you're not ready. And you still feel worth for yourself. So everything at the end of the day is protection of what? Value. Well, what kind of value? Well, your own personal value. Like, for example, somebody goes up to you and they go, whoa, you did 10 years in college to work as a psychotherapist? Are you any good? I'm really struggling, clinical work's exhausting. And then I come up in there and I go, hey, I've only been doing this for 2 years. And then they go, how much do you charge? And I tell them my rates. They lose their shit, right? Did I say anything offensive, or did I just tell them how I live my life? Well, I'll tell you what happened. Their ego is not allowing them to realize how they've dedicated their time due to their lack of belief in themselves. And I, perhaps, am an embodiment of everything that tells them that their value is non-existent. So do you understand how you can be polarizing when you're authentic? Because perhaps you can create things without the systems that everybody has went to create things. So what I found is really wild is that even when that will happen, it's like, oh, I went to 10 years of college. Do you know this or this, right? And of course, I won't try to debate them or justify that I know what I'm talking about. But I often noticed what I represent as a person is somebody who hasn't went to 10 years of college and knows what he's saying. So for somebody that has went to 10 years of college and then meets somebody who's making 3 times as much as they are effortlessly and didn't dedicate 10 years to a title, am I just being honest and authentic? Or perhaps, am I challenging all of their beliefs? What are they protecting themselves from? Value. Why did they get the title? They were attached to value. So this is going to be very fun. When you guys realize what you're attached to.
It depends on how you say it, doesn't it also? When you say I'm so much better than you, or I make
Well,
so much money, or you say just the facts, and you speak with humility and I don't know.
Well, I'll explain, right? Somebody goes, hey, what do you do? And you go, well, I work in mental health and personal development. That's amazing. Are you a psychologist? No, I'm not a psychologist. I'm a coach. There's something that people are typically taught in institutions, and they have a lot of attached value to whatever they have achieved because of their self-worth issues. For example, I thought about this. My brother told this to me. I was 21 years old, and I said, dude, I have a gift for people. I've been studying psychology for 7 years. I really know I can help people, but should I quit my job as a trainer and go to maybe college, get some sort of degree or something? And he just put his hand on my shoulder and he said, why do you need a degree? And I said, well, so people can think I'm credible. And he's like, what makes you credible? The piece of paper, or the experience that you have, or the results that you offer people? What did I feel? I felt fear. So perhaps what was driving me to get the degree, or perhaps leave this so I can start in the schooling system, I'd be 26 by the time I'm out with a BA. I'm 24 right now. What I realized stopped me and crippled me was this fear around other people challenging my worth, and I was afraid of that. I didn't believe in myself. So I looked to an institution to give me what? Belief. Perhaps maybe if I had that, and when somebody would challenge me, oh, how are you qualified to help people with schizophrenia? Or how are you qualified to help people in struggling relationships? Or how are you qualified to help people with their self-worth issues? I would say, excuse me, I have a degree from Harvard. And then end the conversation. What I often realized is that that's called ego, right? When you address somebody as, hey, Mr. Wiseman, nice to meet you. And he goes, it's Dr. Wiseman. What have we found? An insecurity, right? What are we trying to do here is trying to free you from this, because you can become far more powerful than you could have ever imagined if you were willing to go there with yourself. And I told this to Leandra yesterday. There's what you know, there's what you know you don't know, and then there's what you don't know you don't know. The what you don't know you don't know, and I'll tell you what it feels like. It feels like somebody is shaking the floor under you and telling you to fuck off. That's the emotion that you're going to feel when you step off into the don't know you don't know. There's actually something interesting in my life, which is my ego takes a lot of control, especially when going into areas I don't know. How do I know that? Well, when I went to jiu-jitsu, I said, I have experience in jiu-jitsu. Your white belts can't tap me out. I got tapped out by a 135-pound dude. What do you think happened to me after? I started losing my shit. I started sweating in the car. I went pale. And I thought about it. I was like, well, why did that happen? I just got tapped out at a day of jiu-jitsu. And the guy said, good match. He shook my hand after. Was it a game of jiu-jitsu, or was my self-worth on the line? You know, this is something I've noticed which has really helped people overcome rejection, which is, what do you attach your value to? Maybe you're not free. Maybe you're still attached to something. And by the way, you know, for years, for somebody who's done maybe 10,000 approaches in his lifetime, and I know this is for Leandra particularly, and I've invited myself into dorm rooms, and I've found myself in crazy situations, and I've just went for it, you know, or else there's a split in the timeline. I realized that I never was free, because I was always attached to something. I had to be attached to something in order for me to do something. I never actually cared. And I would always have, I always cared subconsciously. I wanted to be indifferent. So what I often notice is I became more and more anxious the more and more approaches that I did, no matter how many I did. And I was thinking about it for a second. I said, well, why? Because so much of my value was on the line about me being a guy that approaches people. My identity became attached to it. It was no longer approach the girl because she's cute. It was approach the girl because she's kind of cute and you're around guys. Set the bar. And I was like, dude, what the fuck? So how deep can this shit run? Especially when you've done it, you know? Like, and I have a friend who's really taking this to heart. And he's probably one of the most educated people on planet Earth that I know. He feels like an AI. He's so smart. And of course, he's very charming too. So he's not like just one-dimensionally smart, but he would always get this crippling anxiety around women, and of course, what would I tell him? Well, just approach them, and over time, it will dissipate. No, there was so much attached value that he had to women that he wasn't interacting with women. He was interacting with a goddess that would determine his value. And then eventually, when he started getting good at it, he would attach his overall progress to the amount of approaches that he's made a day, and then eventually he would start to still feel that anxiety. It just shifted. And so what do all of these things kind of come around? Well, ego feeds off two things, perception and control. Right? There's this need for control. And I want you guys to think about this, that your ego doesn't really allow you to establish those core level beliefs. Why? Because you can't even go there with yourself. I couldn't go there with myself. I couldn't actually tell myself the truth when I felt an underlying anxiety when I was in a social environment, when I'd see a beautiful girl. Why would it trigger this like fuck feeling? And then a whole narrative going through my head, and I'm doing math. And then when I would approach them, I'd be so strategic, and every line would hit, and it would make them giggle and laugh, and I'd get a number, and no text back. And then what do you think happens to my ego? It takes a fucking huge hit, and it gets bigger. And I go to the next girl trying to control the outcome. And so what I often notice creates a lot of this like humility. And the reason why I say humility is because there's humanity where there's humility. And where there's humanity, you don't need to work as hard. You know the guy that gets up on stage, the self-help dude, and he's like a fucking like, I've done NLP since I came out the womb. I know my subconscious, right? And you're like, why do I want to rip my skin off when I hear you speak? But versus when you just see somebody get up on stage, you're like, oh, hey, what's going on, everybody? And you're like, first time public speaking, never really done this before. And you make a little laugh or a giggle, but it's real and sincere. Everybody goes like this. The guy that wants to own the room is invisible. The guy that wants to be himself, everybody looks. 50% of the crowd doesn't care, 20% love you, the other 20% hate you. It's a good ratio. But I'm working with 20% that are listening, and that's what matters. All of these things are around protecting value. And what I often noticed is that you have to be really, and this is something for you, Leander, is I know this, you really like these deep conversations, you like these deep connections, right? Being able to take things there is going to take a lot of detachment from the narratives that you've created about yourself, about how you are significant through understanding these things about philosophy, psychology, and sociology, all the things about people. What I often notice is that we can't do the things that we want because we're attached to something. And when you realize you're not attached to things, that's when you live for yourself, when no longer outcome becomes a priority at all. And in fact, you start to become free. You start to become magnetic. And that's what I really want to create here. So now that we have an understanding of that, let's go ahead and get into some things to give you a better idea of how this works. Well, how deep can it go? Well, it can go to the point to where even the things that you say to others that you claim that you believe are not actually beliefs. They're attached to value that make you feel a certain way. It could go to the point where eventually it's not hooking up with a girl because you find her attractive, but it's because about you facing your insecurities about being able to experience something like that around a hot girl. There was also a certain point in my life where I had this serious relationship, and after that relationship, I turned into Matthew McConaughey. Kind of very similar to you, Leander. I spent hours reading, hours gathering information, hours playing piano, hours speaking, hours writing, and I had no problem with it. But I could also tell you one thing, is that I stopped speaking to people. I stopped engaging with the world. I stopped approaching strangers. And that was something I used to do all the time because I would always find myself in this, I don't know, you find yourself in crazy places. When you're willing to interact with the reality outside of you and you're willing to take it that far. Remember, that was my identity back then. My identity was the social guy. The amount of girls that would approach me would be zero because I never let them approach me. I'd always approach them first. Right? So I never really approached girls because I was confident. I approached girls because I was afraid if a girl came up to me, it would change my beliefs about needing to approach women, and then that would lose my feeling of control. And I didn't want to lose control. I wanted to be in control of every situation all the time. And if a girl came up to me, how would I be perceived as confident? I've approached over 10,000 girls. Honey, you don't know how hard I've worked. You're going to be the girl that I approach this time so that you can see my value. And what do you think stopped me from confronting those beliefs? My ego was fucking like Megamind, dude. But why was my ego so big? What do most people think about egos? Is they go, well, it's because you're arrogant and narcissistic. Fair, you're more likely to look for other people's attention, but it's more than likely because you're exceptionally insecure and you're not willing to process the pain of the things that you've experienced that made you adopt those beliefs about yourself. My life only started changing when I started living with humanity. The thing I speak about to people is awakening their humanity. You know, capacity is one thing, but if you really want influence over the world, have connection to your humanity because you'll be real, you'll be recognized. Even for when they hired the new Superman, what gave him the job was actually that he showed up to the cafe and he spilled his coffee. And he's like, fuck, I fucked up, right? And the guy hits him up and he goes, hey, by the way, you got the job. And he goes, what? I got the job. I spilled coffee everywhere. It even got on your lap. And he said, yeah, you sold me on the clumsy Clark Kent. I didn't believe that you could be Superman when you spilled the coffee, right? What do we often do when we come into things of environments of people, even Instagram or public speaking or approaching? There's no incorporation of humanity and it makes it impossible. And your ego is attached to too many things, so you can't feel humility. Humility is this, just to give you guys a better idea. It's openness. And it comes hand in hand with vulnerability. Eventually, you no longer exist to gain outcomes. You exist to test your ability in reality. Well, anyways, Dylan, what do you want to share?
I forgot how I want to ask it, but I have this struggle with the humanity thing and then like the work you do and the value you provide. And sometimes I wonder if sometimes I consider going full-time artist and just completely indulging in myself and just making the art that I want to make. But then there's this other side of me where it goes, you're so selfish, you're not providing any value to the community, you're not helping people, you're just purely indulging in your self-interest. And I don't know which is right.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's one of those things where I just have to start doing it and putting it out there and then seeing down the line how it helps others
Yeah.
and how it could.
I'm still here.
Or if it's purely just like, oh man, like, because it just seems selfish.
Mm-hmm. Well, see, that's very interesting, right? Something you're protecting yourself from here, you have to be able to establish that. Any sign of progress you guys want to make, you have to remember, why the fuck am I here? Why am I stuck in this conundrum? What am I protecting myself from? You know, often we use big blanket terms. Blanket terms work to guide you in the general direction, but if you already know the general direction, you need to get specific. And that's the only way that you can do that. By the way, the only way that you guys can find specifics is by communicating vulnerably to people around you and speaking to them with indifference about how they see you. One of the things that's changed my life completely was my ability to speak openly about the struggles that I have with people that I just met and friends that I've been friends with that see me as Superman. I was willing to get rid of their perception of me so I can speak, for fuck's sake. For 19 years of my life, I never communicated the things that were really on my heart with my close friends because in my head, I was a leader. And they can't see the leader ever be weak. What do you think that made me when people talked about politics, religion, sex? Trigger. Everything fucking triggered me. But I didn't care because I was ready to give my left arm up to God so that I can exist as a motherfucker. I was willing to do whatever it takes. But that's not somebody of value. That's somebody who has no value at all. So there's something I want you to do, right? Which is realize you need to run this conversation for yourself through others. Remember that. For yourself through others. Are you willing to show people who you are? Because right now, Dylan, people go, what, Dylan? Like, you're not satisfied with where you're at in life? I thought you were like the happiest guy ever. And then that triggers an insecurity, right? Which is, oh my God, wait, I'm losing control of how he sees me. I can't get him to be what I need anymore. Where's my validation? That could be happening. And I never noticed that, but actually most people like to be alone. I'll tell you why loneliness is such a problem. I drew this picture the other day, and I feel like it's just the best way to describe it, because this is how most people exist. And it's sad. It's really sad, because I can't find it, actually. I'll just draw it again. Your problems are not that hard to solve. You just want to solve them on your own, and then they become impossible. My business coach that I should have hired when I was 19 so that I could get out of my depression, because I was exceptionally depressed at 19, that depression carried on until I was 21. After 21, it started to pick up again, and it amplified by an exponent of 60, because this time I was aware of my decisions. This time I was aware of what I was doing with my life, and this time I was aware of who I could be. Do you understand that there's a double-edged sword here? If you can see your potential and you could envision a lot of what you can become, you're also going to be left with a lot of fear. You're going to be left with a lot of anxiety. You're going to be left with a lot of negative emotions about how you feel about yourself. And do you understand the problems of that? It's like you're playing as the young hero, and he gets out of bed and sees what he can be, and he sees himself on the throne with this beautiful maiden, and he's an emperor. He's like Paul Atreides from Dune, and he's taken over the fucking universe. And then you see yourself now, and you look in the mirror, and there's a skinny twig, right, who looks at himself like this. And you're like, how the fuck's that going to happen, right? Often we're hit with these massive visions, but we're also hit with these unideal realities. And then we're also hit with what will happen to me when I start this journey? At what point in that journey will I become that? And let's just say God came to you in a dream and told you you would be that. You think that that's comforting? It's not. You're left with every day while you're this, waiting until you become that. So perhaps maybe that's why he didn't come down in a dream and tell you what you would be, because you wouldn't start constantly working towards that vision with a feeling of being enough, which is the hardest thing for people, which is, how can I start a process without feeling like I'll be good? By starting the process. You know, playing the fool is something I really promote here, and this is for you, Dylan, which is I want you to do that. The people that you actually really value your opinion. Here's the thing about artists. You guys want to know about artists and creatives? Biggest egos. Actors, massive egos. And by the way, you want to know the ones with the biggest egos? Not the A-listers. The guys that you see on casting in LA. The same thing goes for people in personal development. Massive egos. Why? Because how do you think I get paid? The richer you think I am, the happier you think I am, and the more sex you think I have, well, the more I can get you to do what I want you to do, and the more you'll pay me.